Hello, I'm Dr. Ellen Craig. I'm a clinical psychologist and I work with the Hertfordshire Community Perinatal Team. And welcome to one in our series of webinars around managing all things to do with our mental health and our well-being at this quite unusual, odd time during the coronavirus crisis. We're running the series of webinars to cover things like managing anxiety, managing our mood at the moment, and we're delighted that so many people are tuning in. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about managing worry and uncertainty. We know that there's a lot of both of those things around at the moment. I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see my slides that I've prepared. There we are. Okay, so I'm going to be thinking about managing worry and uncertainty at the moment during coronavirus times. So I wanted to begin by just highlighting that worry is a very, very normal response right now. It's a very understandable way of responding to this new threat that we're facing. And I just wanted to also reflect upon how odd it would be if we spoke to somebody who said that they weren't worried. So it's a very, very normal, very understandable response to these quite alarming, quite strange, quite new times that we're living in. There's been a study done recently by the Office of National Statistics that found that actually 84% of adults in the UK are describing themselves as feeling very worried or somewhat worried at the moment. And going a little step further than that, there's actually 47% of adults reporting they're experiencing high levels of anxiety. So I was really struck by those figures. So we know that a lot of the population out there, a lot of people are struggling with anxiety and worry and stress right now. So I wanted to also begin by thinking a little bit about what worry is. We're all quite familiar with the idea of worry. We're all probably familiar with times in the past when we've worried. But if we really kind of explore it and unpick it a little bit and just think about, well, what is worry? What does that mean? Then it can give us some little clues as to how we can begin to manage it a bit differently. So what is worry? Well, we know that worry is anxious thoughts that can get stuck going round and round inside our heads. They tend to be anxious thoughts about the future. They often tend to be sort of what if thoughts. What if I run out of toilet roll, for example? And they also often tend to be quite catastrophic. So they tend to build on each other and get bigger and bigger and more scary. So for example, we think about worry snowballing in this way, building up and getting bigger and bigger. So worry may start as, for example, I'm not sure if I can get my hours in this week to do all my work that my boss needs, which then could grow a little bit. Well, I'm not going to be able to pay the bills. What if I get made redundant? How will I pay the mortgage? We might lose the house. We might end up on the streets, etc., etc. And you might find that a pattern like that feels familiar to you. What we also know about worry is that it tends to be about several different topics. Even now, sort of under the general kind of umbrella idea of coronavirus, there are lots of different worry topics within that. So we might be worried about our health. We might be worried about the health of other people around us, our loved ones, our friends. We might be worrying about homeschooling and whether we're doing enough, whether we're doing it right, whether the kids are managing okay. We might be worried about getting food in, making sure we've got enough food in that the kids will eat. We might be worrying about paying the bills. We might be worrying about what happens if I need to see the GP. How will I get my prescriptions? And so on and so on. And we know that worry is made worse by uncertainty. So as human beings, we don't tend to do very well at being uncertain, feeling uncertain. We really crave predictability and certainty. So at the moment, we're having to tolerate an awful lot of uncertainty, possibly more than we've ever had to tolerate before in our lives. And that can be really tricky. And that can really allow the worries to build up and to fester a little bit. But we're going to come back to uncertainty towards the end of the presentation. And we know that worrying is very preoccupying. It's very compelling. You know, the worries kind of suck us in, they hook us in. And we often can feel quite a strong urge to need to worry, or to want to worry. And for some people, worrying can seem like a positive thing to do. It can seem like it might solve problems, or it might motivate us or prepare us in some way. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that idea later, but we actually know that actually it's the opposite. Worrying has the opposite effect. So worrying can also bring with it other emotions. We can feel fearful and afraid, and we can also feel quite irritable. You know, if our headspace is taken up with worries, it's quite easy to snap at other people, at our family, if they're trying to talk to us. We just don't have the headspace for it. And it also comes with lots of, you know, slightly uncomfortable physical sensations. So we might notice that we feel quite physically agitated or unsettled. We might notice that we feel fatigued, tired. We might notice some physical tension, some more aches and pains than we normally feel. And we know that it can really interfere with our sleep pattern, as well as things like our concentration. And again, I'm going to come back to that in a little bit more detail shortly. We also know that worry can often feel uncontrollable, can feel overwhelming. We can feel bombarded by worrying thoughts as if we just can't do anything about them. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on. And we also know that worrying can really take us away from the present moment, away from the things that we want to be focusing on, the things that are important to us and meaningful to us, the things that we value. We can feel really stuck in our heads, and it can be really hard to focus on anything other than a worry that's going around in our heads. So it really does have a whole kind of host of impacts on us as well. Just wanted to share a little diagram that I made, just to kind of highlight that, how bombarded by worries we could potentially feel at the moment, how many different worries there could be whirling around in our head. So worries such as, will I get it? Have I already got it? Will my family be okay? Will the kids be okay? Will my parents be okay? Who will look after my parents if one of them falls ill? Will the NHS cope? Is my salary going to keep coming in? Is my job okay? Can I get enough food in? What's going to happen with my work in the longer term? Am I doing enough for the kids? What if I need to see the midwife and my antenatal appointment's going to be the same as I'd hoped? So there's a really wide variety, even as I said, underneath this general kind of coronavirus worry, there's a lot of different worry topics that we could be experiencing right now, and it could feel quite overwhelming. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about what is worry, but I also wanted to think a little bit about what is worry not. So what do we know about what worry isn't? And we do know that worry isn't helpful. So there's been quite a lot of research into this that's shown that worry really impacts quite negatively on our cognitive resources, so our ability to think. It's very difficult to concentrate if you're really worried. It's very difficult to pay attention to something other than the worries. Your memory is impacted and decision-making skills are all impaired. So worry does have quite a big negative impact on the way that we think, the way that we can pay attention to things. We also know that worry isn't problem solving. Now, it can sometimes feel like worrying about something is kind of solving the problem, but actually if we really unpick what's going on in our heads, we'll quite quickly realise that we're just stuck in a bit of a cycle and that actually it's not problem solving. So with problem solving, you tend to move forward, make decisions, make a plan. Doesn't normally take longer than sort of 10 minutes of something in your head to begin to make a plan if you are problem solving. So if you notice that something's been stuck in your head for perhaps over 10 minutes, it might well be that it's become a worry. So we know that worry doesn't prepare us or motivate us, actually quite the opposite. So it really impairs those skills. And we can just feel like we can't see the woods for the trees. Worry isn't actually dangerous. So it feels very uncomfortable. It can be quite distressing. But for some people, there can be a sense that actually worrying is dangerous, that it's harmful to my health. You're pregnant, you might worry that it's harmful to your pregnancy in some way. But we know that actually worry itself isn't harmful to us. So we can't kind of lose control if we're worrying. It isn't harmful to us physically. We know that long periods of acute stress can impact on our physical health, but episodes of worry don't impact on us physically in the same way. So it isn't dangerous. And we also know that it's not uncontrollable. So worries can often feel completely overwhelming, as if we're being bombarded and there's no way out. We can feel really stuck in a worry or in a kind of pattern of worrying. But actually we know that we can control it. And this is something that I'm going to focus on this morning, and I'm going to try and give you some tips to think about ways that you can control worry, ways we can manage it a little bit differently. I also just wanted to touch on this idea that we use to kind of frame therapy for worries, and these little skills for worries that I'm going to tell you about. Is this idea that if you're being bombarded by lots of worries, they're very overwhelming, there's too many of them to engage with individually. So the sort of overall aim of managing worries is just to find ways of disengaging from that worry, of parking it, just leaving it somewhere. So that's what most of these skills are going to focus on, ways of just disengaging from that worry process, to give you a bit of respite from the worry, to be able to get out of our heads if we're worrying a lot, and to engage in other things in the present moment, things that are important to us. So that's the kind of overarching aim here. Okay, and a little slide just to outline what it is that I'm going to talk to you about today. If any of you have had any CBT, then some of these things might be familiar. They're quite standard little skills and strategies for managing worry. We know they work, they're evidence-based, and I think they're quite useful little things to have in our repertoire. So I won't read you this slide, I will just get on and tell you about them. So one of the first things to do to tackle worrying is to really make our worries concrete and specific. So worries often tend to be quite vague, quite sort of abstract in nature, quite sort of expansive and big, which can make them feel completely overwhelming and insurmountable. So for example, worries such as, I won't cope with coronavirus, I won't cope with this situation, or we'll go under financially, or I'm not being a good mum. Those kind of worries are quite abstract, they're quite hard to pin down and specify exactly what that looks like, exactly what that worry is about. We know generally speaking what they're about, but it's quite hard to kind of get hold of them in a way that's useful. So we want to really grab hold of these worries and pinpoint, what is this about? How can we make this into something concrete, something specific? So a few examples of that. So just taking that idea of, well, I won't cope with this coronavirus situation. I can't cope with this coronavirus situation. Turning that into something kind of real and concrete, just thinking, well, what is this worry about? What am I actually kind of scared of happening right now? What's going on for me right now? And one example of that might be, well, the coronavirus situation is really hard and challenging, and I feel more anxious than normal. So straight away, it's a bit more manageable, that worry, it's more tangible. It suggests things that we could do to solve that worry. Again, sort of going with the example, well, we'll go under financially, making that one a bit more concrete, a bit more specific, you know, what exactly is going on there? And one example of that could be, the finances are getting tough, we can pay the bills, but we might need to think about how to manage the mortgage payments. And again, you're really kind of focusing in on exactly what that worry is, making it specific, making it concrete, suggests ways of tackling it. And again, I'm not being a good mum. So that might turn into something like, I'm not able to give Charlotte the attention I'd like to right now. So it immediately gives that focus to the worry, it brings them into kind of sharper focus. They feel a bit more manageable, you can think about what to do next. They don't feel quite so overwhelming, quite so kind of all-consuming. So that's a really important point to start with. Let's make these worries concrete and real. What are they actually about? And then we're in a position to switch to problem solving. So as I've touched on, this is a really important distinction that we want to be making with worries, because there can be a sense that worrying is problem solving, but actually it's not. It's not problem solving. If you're problem solving, you're not worrying. You're worrying, you're not problem solving. But what we want to be doing is we want to be switching into problem solving mode rather than worrying mode. But the first thing that you need to do before you start that is to figure out whether you can problem solve this worry. So worries tend to fall into two groups. They're either kind of future orientated, they might be about something that hasn't even happened yet. We usually can't problem solve those ones. Some worries we can problem solve, they're a bit more concrete, we're able to address them, but we need to figure out which kind of worry we're being troubled by. So really pinpoint the worry again. If you can, turn it into something concrete and specific and just think, well, can I do anything about this worry? Can I do anything about it right now? Can I problem solve it? If the answer is yes, then go ahead and make your plan to problem solve. If the answer is no, then it's about disengaging from the worry, kind of giving yourself permission to park it, to leave it, change your focus of attention, get out of your head. So I've got some examples of that, which will hopefully bring it to life a little bit. So these are examples of two worries. So I'm going to run out of nappies. And does the NHS have enough critical care beds? So the first example, I'm going to run out of nappies. Yeah, you can probably problem solve that, I would think. And one example of that might be, okay, I'm going to run out of nappies. I know my supply will run out probably by Wednesday, so I'm going to try and get to the shops on Tuesday. If they don't have any, I'll email the neighbours and see if they can help. So really making that kind of concrete plan, make the arrangements that you might need for that plan to go ahead. So check in with partner, whoever, they can look after the kids. But that's an example of a worry that you could problem solve. And then once you've got your plan in place, you can park that worry. We'll come back to that again in a minute. So an example of a worry that you couldn't problem solve. Does the NHS have enough critical care beds? It's not an awful lot you can do about that, probably, unless you're an NHS manager. So if the answer is no, I can't do anything about that now, you need to give yourself permission to leave that, disengage from that worry, to park it. It's not something that you've got the headspace for, got enough on your plate. You need to leave that one somewhere else. So I hope that makes sense, that idea of worrying versus problem solving and trying to move into problem solving mode. The next slide kind of brings that to life a little bit more. This is a really useful little structure for thinking about exactly this technique. And we're going to be sending these handouts out with the PowerPoint slides later on. If you don't get this, please do email us, because this is quite a useful one to have. And feel free to share it with your friends, teach your friends. You may already have seen this somewhere before. It's quite a common little diagram, but we call this the worry tree. And this just gives some structure for thinking about, can I problem solve this worry? And if so, what do I need to do? So the first step is notice that worry, really kind of pinpoint what exactly is it that I'm worrying about. Is this worry about a current problem or a hypothetical situation? Can I do something about it? The answer is no. This is a hypothetical situation. This is something in the future that hasn't happened yet. Give yourself permission to let the worry go and change your focus of attention. That bit's easier said than done. I'm going to come back to some strategies for how to do that a bit later on in the presentation. If you think, well, no, this is a current problem, this is something I could do something about, then make your action plan. So yes, I can problem solve it. Let's make the plan. You may decide that it's something you can do now. You can problem solve now. Can you get out to the shops right now to buy the extra nappies? Brilliant, let's do that. If you can't do it now, then make a plan for when you can do it, and make a plan for how you're going to do that. Schedule it, pop it in the diary, and then once it's scheduled, once it's planned, that's the point at which you can give yourself permission to let the worry go. You don't need to carry that with you anymore, and change your focus of attention. So that's a nice little way to think about this idea of worrying versus problem solving. and just following those branches down. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this idea of an external focus of attention, which is quite important this morning. I'm going to think about that for a few slides now. So I quite like to draw the analogy of our attention being like a beam of light, being like a torchlight or a flashlight, or even a lighthouse. And when we're really worried, the beam of light is focused inside our head, often on those thoughts that are going around, on the kind of anxious, scary predictions for the future that are going round and round in our head. And we want that beam of light not inside our head, but we want it to be focused outside our head on something. If your attention is externally focused, it's impossible to worry. You're focused in the present moment. There's no space in your head for kind of worries about the future. So this is a really, really good skill to develop to manage worry. So it gives a little bit of respite from it. And importantly, it allows us to engage in the present moment. So doing something that's meaningful for us. So the worry is no longer kind of trapping us inside our head. We can engage in other things. So playing with the baby, giving the older kids some attention, 20 minutes of homeschooling, even relaxing for you, strange as that may sound. And I really like this little motto about focus on what you're doing, not what you're thinking. So really kind of getting that focus of attention out of your head and onto the world around you. Now we know that the nature of attention and the nature of thinking is that it's going to flick back inside your head. That beam of light is going to turn back inside your head. Absolutely normal. That's what brains do. If we're stressed and anxious, they do that even more. So the kind of urge to worry, the urge to kind of follow our train of worries and anxious thoughts in our head is even stronger. So while we're doing these exercises, it's just really important to remember that our minds are going to wander. Our attention is going to go back inside our head. And it's just about noticing when that happens and kind of gently refocusing on what you were focusing on externally. And I've just got a few little examples of exercises that you can try, just play around with, see what works for you. But these are all some really good ways of getting your attention focused outside of your head. So you might like to find a quiet moment and choose something to focus your attention on completely. So something you know that you can be really absorbed in, something that will engage you. And that's going to be different for everybody. And you might have a sense of what that is for you. So it might be that you can become completely focused on the baby for a few minutes, or completely focused on a piece of music, or different sounds in the environment around you, or perhaps colours around you, and perhaps different shades of green outside, or noticing different blues inside in your room. Or you might like to focus on different shapes around you, or notice where the shadows and the light fall. So you'll have a bit of a sense of what might be able to kind of absorb your attention for a while. And you just want to focus your attention completely on this. And just another little reminder here that your mind will wander. And it's just gently refocusing on what you were attending to and trying not to be frustrated or giving up when that happens. Just really recognizing that this is something that happens for everybody. Even the most kind of mindful of people, even Buddhist monks, will notice that their mind is wandering. They're just really good at catching it wandering and refocusing it gently. The thing with these kind of attention training exercises is the more that you practice, the longer you'll be able to maintain that external focus of attention. So that's what we see changing. Your attention is a bit like a muscle. You sort of exercise it regularly, then it's going to get better at this. But again, it will always wander eventually, and also it's going to wander more if you're feeling more stressed. So just being really aware of that as well, and kind to yourself if you notice that happening. It's very natural. So that's one way of practicing that external focus of attention. This is another way that you might like to do it. So picking a daily task, something that you know you do regularly, ideally every day. So for example, having a shower, having a bath, getting the baby dressed, getting the baby washed, feeding the baby, washing up or washing your hands. That's something we're all doing a lot of at the moment. Brushing teeth is a good one. Going out for a walk, taking the baby for a walk, drinking a coffee, any kind of little daily activity that you do and that you might be able to become immersed in the details of. So really kind of throw yourself into this task. You know, think about, well, what does this activity feel like? What's the texture like? Where on your body do you have contact with it? So perhaps if it's getting the baby dressed, then really focusing on what the baby clothes feel like against your skin. What does the baby's skin feel like against yours? Really focusing on where you have that contact. You might like to tune into some aspect of what you can see about that task. What catches your eye? How does it appear? What are the colours? Where's the light? Where are the shadows? So really kind of honing in on these little details that we don't normally attend to. You could do it with hearing. Often that's quite a nice one to start with. What sounds do you notice? You could think about what sounds you notice immediately around you. What are the sounds a little bit further away from you? Sounds in other rooms, in other bits of the building, and sounds on the street. It's all a bit quieter than normal at the moment, but you'll usually surprise yourself and find something to tune into. Could do it with smell, with taste. It's all about just absorbing ourselves in these little details, these little stimuli that we wouldn't normally notice, but that can take our attention, can absorb our attention. So that's quite a nice one to do. You can't do too much of this. The more you can get this into your day, the better. So if you can pick a couple of those tasks, brushing teeth is really good. There's a lot of sensations and smells involved in that. Having a shower is a really good one. You can really tune into the sensation of the water on your skin, what that feels like, the temperature, the movement of the water, smells, kind of how the bubbles look in your hands. There's all sorts of different things that you could focus on. Even, you know, a minute a day of a little task like this is going to be helpful, but the more you can do it, the better. It's quite nice just to begin to practice it when you're feeling a little bit calmer, just to get into the hang of it, get used to it a little bit, and build up your confidence with using it, so that when you are feeling quite stressed or worrying a lot, then it's easier to switch into that external focus of attention mode. And you'll probably by then have figured out what works for you well. So I would recommend having a little go like that, sort of using it kind of regularly, preventatively at first. And then as you get a bit more confident with it, use it to respond to anxiety and worry as well. Okay, and just two more little exercises that you can do which help with this. So again, this idea of using our senses. So you can go through this little list and think, well, what are 5 things around me I can see? What are 4 things around me I can feel? What are 3 things I can hear? 2 things I can touch or smell, perhaps? And take 1 slow, deep breath. So that's quite nice. Again, tune into the world around you out of your head. Connecting with physical things around you as well through touch can be quite good to kind of get you out of your head. There's a few ideas around that. So you're pushing your feet into the floor, kind of really noticing what that feels like. Tune into the sensations of pressure. Feel your socks or your shoes or perhaps your slippers against your feet. You know, wriggle your toes, push them even further in, and just really think about what that feels like. You can do that with your hands, with your arms as well. Kind of notice your chair underneath you. You could push into it with your fingers and notice what that feels like, or your bed if you're lying down. Tune into where your body touches the chair or the bed. What does that feel like? See if you can push a bit deeper. So really kind of connecting with the physical things around you as well can be quite good to get out of your head. So I would really encourage you to just experiment with a few of those ideas, see what works for you, and just really kind of notice the impact on you as you just give yourself a bit of a break from the worrying. Okay, so I'm not going to say a huge amount about mindfulness because I don't have the time. But for those of you that are familiar with mindfulness, perhaps some people are already practicing it, perhaps some people gave it a go a while ago and have let it drop a bit. But mindfulness is very, very similar to this idea about having an external focus of attention. So mindfulness is all about engaging in the present moment and paying attention to really kind of what's going on in that moment for us. Mindfulness can be about attending in the present moment to things around us. So again, the sounds, colours, textures, touch. But it can also be about attending to what's going on inside us, our thoughts that are going around in our head, the emotions that we're feeling, where we're feeling them in our body, kind of what physical sensations we're noticing. And there's lots of wonderful things about mindfulness. It's known to be very, very good at reducing worry, reducing stress, at lifting our mood. It can build our emotional resilience as well. There's loads and loads of really good mindfulness resources out there now. If you're interested in this, please do send us a separate email, because we have lots of resources and handouts we can send you around these kind of resources. But just a few kind of good ones off the top of my head. Toulouse Mindfulness and the Oxford Mindfulness Centre, they're both websites, and they have courses that they offer, and kind of one-off exercises that you can try. So really worth checking out if you're interested. Couple of apps as well that we know are really good: Headspace app and the Calm app, also really good if you'd like to give mindfulness a go or return to mindfulness. But just really kind of trying to get these mindful moments into your day wherever you can. So in fact, when you're eating is a really good one, or if you're feeding the baby, for example, those kind of moments, just try and squeeze them into your day wherever you can. Okay, so moving on to think about something a little bit different now. So what I wanted to sort of introduce now is this idea that we all have slightly unhelpful thinking habits. Now, this is common to us all, but what happens is if we're feeling worried or stressed, these thinking habits or thinking biases can become more and more pronounced. And then that in itself can exacerbate worry and anxiety and stress. So I just wanted to spend a few moments thinking about this here. This is a handout that, again, we're going to send out with the PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to skip ahead and come back to that handout, because I just want to sort of kind of introduce this idea of thinking biases and what they are and the effect of them. So as I said, we all have them. They're sort of inherent in our human nature somehow. But they do make worry and anxiety worse. And then as we get more worried, the biases become more strong and more biased. And so then we can become more anxious and so on. And we know that worry thoughts are often quite biased. They can be quite distorted. So it's really important just to be aware of our own biases. We can sometimes catch them and adjust them. But it's really important to kind of be aware of our patterns. We will all have certain patterns of thinking like this. So with coronavirus, I was just thinking of kind of particular thinking areas that might be relevant with coronavirus. And I just wanted to highlight a few to watch out for that some of you might be familiar with. So I think a particular one is catastrophizing. We have a bit of a tendency to kind of think the worst when we're worrying. And I think that's particularly relevant for us all at the moment. We can really kind of jump to the worst case scenario. We can often find that we've got a bit of a mental filter operating as well. And this just refers to a bias where we can pay attention to negative or sort of anxiety provoking information and then ignore the more neutral, the more kind of positive information as well. We're all being bombarded at the moment by quite scary, alarmist things in the news. So this one can be quite a strong bias at the moment. Black and white thinking, this is also quite a common bias, where we tend to think, well, everything's either all brilliant and lovely or it's all dreadful and horrendous. And we know that actually real life, even now, is probably more like somewhere in the middle. So that's another one to be aware of. Fortune telling. So we all like to know what's going to happen in the future, but of course we don't really ever know. And I think this one is quite relevant now as well, while we're all trying to guess what's going to happen in future. You know, how will I be in a month's time? What's going to happen with the schools? You know, when is all this going to return to normal? And when we're worrying, we tend to put a negative bias on that. Emotional reasoning, I think, is quite an important one as well at the moment. So this refers to a bias whereby we feel like, well, if I'm feeling anxious, if I'm feeling worried, then that must mean that there's something to be anxious about. That must mean that there's something to worry about. It must mean that there's a threat out there. And we know that trying to deduce facts from emotions is not a great way of doing it. So just because we're feeling anxious, it doesn't mean to say that there is actually something to be anxious about. I think something that we can be experiencing at the moment is this sort of sense of kind of rumbling dread, almost this sense that something bad is coming, and often that can be as a result of this emotional reasoning. So I feel scared, therefore there must be something to be scared about, and it doesn't always follow that way. So it's worth being aware of that one as well. And for some people, the anxious times at the moment might be triggering memories of difficulties in the past, perhaps other times when people have faced a threat or felt trapped, or have had to go through a difficult time, or lost somebody, or gone through a traumatic event. So for some people now might be triggering those kind of memories, which makes it, really, really tough. And it's worth just reflecting on that, thinking, well, where is this memory coming from? Is this now or is this in the past? And just trying to separate the two. They're just a few that I picked out that I thought would be particularly relevant for some people now. Just to go back to that handout, that's quite a full list of different kinds of thinking habits or thinking biases that you might notice. So it's really worth having a bit of a read of that and thinking, well, which ones apply to me? And in this handout as well, it gives you sort of little alternatives, little slightly different ways to look at things rather than, for example, catastrophizing. So it's worth having a look at and just thinking through, well, what are my patterns and how can I adjust them? Okay. All right, so this is another little skill which is actually really, really useful for managing worry. And it's quite a different way of thinking about worry. We don't often think about worry in this way. And in my experience, people find this quite useful. So we call this worry time. And the idea is that you're going to schedule yourself some worry time, which we don't often do. It's quite a different way of thinking about it. So what I would like you to just have a play with is scheduling sort of 15 minutes for yourself every day at the same time. Needs to be a time when you can be fairly certain, or certain as you can ever be, that you might not be disturbed. You might get 15 minutes quiet time, 15 minutes downtime, when the kids are in front of the telly, or just after they've gone to bed. Important not to do it when you're lying in bed trying to sleep though. So find 15 minutes every day when you can be guaranteed a little bit of quiet time, and this is your worry time. So you schedule this in as your worry time. Okay? That's all you're going to do at this time is worry. If a worry pops up at any other time in the day, just note it somehow, write it down, make a note in your phone if you can. You might be able to just kind of log it mentally. Sometimes that can leave us just feeling like we've got to carry a lot around with us. So you might find that it's better to try and note it down if you can. And then you come back to it at your worry time. But at worry time, you can choose what you do then. If you'd like to worry about these worries, absolutely fine. That is your worry time. You can go over and over them. It's no problem. Or you can choose to postpone the worry. So you can think, no, I don't need to do that one now. I can do that tomorrow. Or even I can come back to that next week. So in this way, we can really build up our confidence that we can control worrying. So you allow yourself this dedicated worry time. The worry pops up any other time in the day, you postpone it till then. And you may like to worry about it, that's fine when it comes to worry time, or you postpone it to another day. And what people often find is at worry time, they think, well, actually that one doesn't seem so bad now. I don't think I need to concentrate on that now. So it's quite an interesting one to play around with. So I would really recommend having a little try at that one. This is a kind of similar idea where we're building up our control of worries and our confidence that we can control worries. So this is setting up worry-free zones around the house. So these are zones where you are not going to worry. If a worry pops up while you're in these worry-free zones, again, note it down, jot it down, come back to it later, either at worry time or when you're not in a worry-free zone. So you might like to start with 1 or 2 zones and then gradually expand them. So for example, you might like to make the bedroom a worry-free zone, or the dining table a worry-free zone, or the kids' bedroom a worry-free zone. Find some way of reminding yourself that this is a worry-free zone. So you might like to stick post-it notes up on the wall, or some sort of little stickers, little dots, little stars that just remind you, just jog your memory, no, this is a worry-free zone, I'm not going to worry here. And then gradually expand your worry-free zones. So again, I would encourage you to just have a little play around with that, just experiment with that one. It can be a useful one. All right, very important, breathing. We know breathing is good for us, but we do know a lot now about breathing, and we know that it's the single most effective way of calming down our nervous system. So if we're feeling very worried, it's likely that our fight or flight system has switched on a little bit, our threat mode in our brain has switched on, and this might well be running a little bit in the background, which can leave us with some uncomfortable kind of physical sensations. Not a great place to be. And we know that breathing is the best way of calming down our nervous system. So it's a good way of managing worry as well, if you notice that you're stuck in a worry pattern. We have all tried this. Some people like it, some people struggle with it, but it is one to come back to if you feel able to. So there's a few key things to remember about deep breathing. So one is that we're breathing from our tummies, from our diaphragm. Okay? You're not actually breathing from your tummy, but if it feels like you're breathing from your tummy, then you're using your diaphragm to breathe, which is really important. So you want to be able to feel your tummy moving. If you place a hand on your chest and a hand on your tummy, the hand that should be moving is the one on your tummy, not on your chest. There. So when we're anxious and stressed, we tend to do shallow kind of chest breaths, and that can actually fire up our nervous system. So we know the bit of our nervous system that is responsible for the fight or flight response, the threat response, we fire that up by doing the kind of shallow, fast chest breathing. So we want to kind of switch out of that as much as possible. Focus on this nice, deep, slow breathing from your diaphragm. Really important to have longer out breaths. It's the out breath that is really key in kind of calming everything down. So really nice, deep breaths, focusing on the longer out breaths. Some people like to count. You don't have to. If you find a way of counting that works for you, that's great. Another useful strategy is imagining a rectangle in your mind. So as you breathe in, you go up the short side. As you breathe out, you go across the long side, and so on. You need to do this for a while. 1 or 2 nice deep breaths isn't going to cut it. You need to do a few of these, and stick with it until you notice the calming effect. Just a little thing to mention is that for some people it can make them feel a little bit dizzy at first, in your first kind of 2 or 3 breaths. That's fine. That's just there's a bit more oxygen going to your brain than normal. It actually means you're doing it right. The dizzy sensation passes if you just kind of keep pushing on through. But I think for some people that can be a bit alarming and people can stop there, but I would suggest try and keep going if you can. All right. So we're going to send out a handout about this as well, but this is a really key one to use to manage worry. So thinking about signs of safety as well. So as I mentioned, we may be in threat mode quite a lot at the moment. And when we're worrying, our brains are programmed to scan for more threats. And that's a kind of evolutionary adaptation. Probably served us very well back in the saber-toothed tiger days. But if our brains are scanning for threat right now, they're going to find it at the moment. It's a scary time. You know, we're being bombarded by scary news. People around us are worried and anxious as well, and that's very contagious too. So it's worth just taking a minute or two just to reflect on, well, what makes us feel safe? What makes us feel that we can relax, that we can feel secure? This is all about the little things, just the little messages to yourself that you can let go a bit. So it might be having a cuddle with the cat or the dog. It might be family film time on the sofa under a blanket. Could be looking at happy photos from an exciting or relaxing time. Could be your favourite hot drink, or cuddle with the baby. There's a whole host of different things it could be, and you'll have a sense of what that might be for you. But it is really worth trying to get a lot of these little signs of safety into our time at the moment. So moving on to think very briefly about this idea of uncertainty now. And we are living in very, very uncertain times. I don't think we've, many of us will have had to have, deal with quite this much uncertainty as we are at the moment. And we know that that uncertainty is actually more stressful than knowing that something bad will happen, which I think is quite interesting, profound. That's quite an established research finding as well now. So uncertainty is really difficult, it's really stressful, and our brains are wired to be alert to threat. So if we're in a period of uncertainty, the likelihood is that that's going to feel threatening. We know that human beings prefer predictability and a sense of control. We don't do well with uncertainty. It makes us feel kind of agitated, and for some people it can feel really out of control and unsafe. But right now, we kind of got to make friends with that uncertainty. We've got to accept it, we've got to tolerate it. It's not forever, but we do need to be able to do that now. We're struggling with uncertainty and we're striving for certainty. That can often kind of just lead to us feeling even more anxious, and ultimately we won't find that certainty. One thing that can be useful is just to be really clear with ourselves. There are some things we can control and some things that we can't. And I'm going to leave you with a little message about that shortly. Okay. I also wanted to just pop a little slide in here about if you're pregnant. So it's unescapable that it's going to be a worrying time if you're pregnant. Things may well not go as you'd expected, as you planned, as you'd hoped. Perhaps your antenatal appointments are going to look a bit different. Your birth plan might look a bit different. But as I touched on earlier, we don't want worry to become a source of worry if you're pregnant. So I think it can be quite common to feel like worrying is harmful for my pregnancy, worrying is harmful for my unborn baby. And then that leads to a whole nother layer of worry and anxiety, which just kind of escalates. So we know that very kind of serious stress is very acute stress. It's not good for pregnancy. It can lead to low birth weight, or it can lead to baby measuring small as it's growing. But we know that a bit of anxiety or worry isn't harmful to the baby. In fact, there's very good evidence that has recently emerged. Actually, a little bit of anxiety and stress during a pregnancy can actually be beneficial for a baby. So that's kind of, little episodes of anxiety or stress will help the baby's brain to wire to be ready for a little bit of anxiety and stress in the real world, which is actually what they need to be ready for throughout life. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. If you are pregnant and if you're struggling with worry and anxiety at the moment, please do drop us an email, because we've got lots of resources around this. There's lots of stuff being published and released, and lots of courses and things that you can access now. So please do get in touch if you'd like any of those. Similarly for new mums as well, there's also a lot of really, really good support out there at the moment for new mums. So do get in touch if you'd like to hear about that. Okay, and just returning again to this idea of tolerating uncertainty, I think I've touched on most of this. So we really do need to be accepting at the moment that we can't be certain about everything, and that it's okay not to know. Nobody knows. Also really important, I think, to remember that just because we're uncertain, it doesn't mean that something bad is going to happen. Our brains tend to distort things like that. We're quite good if, in a period of uncertainty. We do tend to anticipate the worst. It's worth just kind of keeping a bit of a check on that. But just because we're uncertain doesn't mean something bad is coming. It might be nice to remember times in the past when you've dealt really well with an episode of uncertainty. Perhaps it was something positive, like not knowing the gender of your baby. And how did that go? How did you do that? How did you tolerate that uncertainty? But also it might be a period of more stressful uncertainty in the past, and just thinking, well, how did I deal with that? How did I get through that? What helped? You might know somebody who manages uncertainty really well. You could have a little bit of a reflect on, well, how do they do that? How are they so good with uncertainty? You might even be able to ask them. So it could be useful to explore that a little bit. You might like to briefly consider the most likely outcome. I think it's worth just going back to that point I mentioned earlier here about how if we're really being bombarded by quite overwhelming worries, we can't address each worry individually. But if you've noticed kind of patterns in your worries or themes in your worries that are coming back a lot, then you could address those by just briefly considering, well, what is the most likely outcome here? Can't be certain, but what's most likely to happen? And again, coming back to that message of just engaging in the present moment. If you're feeling unsettled with the uncertainty of it all, get out of your head, engage in something meaningful and important to you in the present moment. And I really like this little diagram that I wanted to share with you. Just really thinking about, well, there's a lot out there that I can't control at the moment, so I can let go of those things. I really don't need to be struggling or wrestling with them at the moment. I don't have the space for it. So I'm going to let go of those things. For example, the amount of toilet paper at the store, how long this will last, how other people are reacting. And you might be aware of other things in your life at the moment that you just can't control, that you need to be able to let go of. And it's worth just kind of naming those, I think. But there are other things that you can control. So that's where to focus your energy, your attention. So I can control turning off the news, finding fun things to do at home, limiting social media, my own social distancing. So there are really important things that we can control, that we know make a difference. And then finally, I wanted to leave you with this quote from Iyanla Vanzant, who is an American lawyer and journalist and writer. And I just thought this was quite relevant currently. This doesn't relate to coronavirus, this is from a while back, but I thought it was quite useful at the moment. So just really remembering that in the midst of all this worry and uncertainty, hold on to the fact that this too shall pass. No storm can last forever. It will never rain 365 days consecutively. Keep in mind that trouble comes to pass, not to stay. Don't worry. No storm, not even the one in your life, can last forever. So I just wanted to leave you with that. And I really hope that there's been something in this presentation that everyone can take away and to try, and that will help kind of reduce the worrying a little bit, to help people feel like they can manage the worry a little bit differently. And take what you feel is going to be useful for you. It won't all be relevant to you, but just take what you think might be useful. It's a bit of a pick and mix job. And thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really lovely seeing how many people have tuned in. We're running a series of webinars, as you're probably aware, so do book in, do register for the ones that you're interested in. We're recording all the sessions as well, so if there's one that you know you can't make, or if you'd like to see one that you haven't been able to attend, do just drop us an email and we can send you links to the recordings. Okay, so thank you again, and I hope everybody stays well and tackle that worrying.